Mode 1.
What's up, people? Happy Friday. I wasn't necessarily planning on doing this video today. But I had some people ask me some questions in response to my last video. And as I do with a lot of my free YouTube videos, I use them as a chance for me to respond, offer response and or rebuttal to certain questions I think are more or less worthy of a response or rebuttal. There's some questions and comments that are thrown my way that I don't feel are even worth a response or rebuttal, but there's some questions that come my way where I'm willing to publicly respond to them. And the biggest thing I want to talk about on today's video is I want to go, I had always, see, this is why I don't like to assume. You'll notice that a lot of times when I do my videos, and I might talk about a concept or an adage or a term that part of me wants to assume that everybody is already familiar with, but you usually hear me say for that 1 or 2% of people listening to me, I'll go ahead and explain what this term means or what's the significance of this adage or slogan or what's the details of this concept. It's not that I assume that all of my listeners and viewers and supporters are ignorant, but there's nothing wrong with being ignorant. I've said this before. A lot of people tend to make ignorant synonymous with stupid. Now, there's a difference between being stupid and ignorant. Ignorant is when you just simply are not familiar with something. There's a certain type of level of knowledge, wisdom, or insight that you're just unfamiliar with. So that's not really a bad thing to be ignorant to something. Stupid is when you basically, somebody has provided you with the knowledge, wisdom, and insight to make better choices and decisions, but you go ahead and make dumb decisions anyway. Or dumb, which is a lot of people confuse with being stupid. Dumb is when you just have a low level of basic intelligence. Anyway, get to the point. I was mentioning in a couple of my recent videos about plausible deniability. And I had at least 3 or 4 guys write me and they said, Alan, I think I know what you mean when you talk about giving women the opportunity for plausible deniability, but I'm not sure. If you could please clarify your definition and description of plausible deniability, because I feel like it might vary from how I feel I understand that term or that concept. So I'm going to talk about plausible deniability. But before I get to that, I had a couple people ask me some questions that had to do with other dating coaches. And I get asked these type of questions actually quite often. And sometimes I ignore the question, and other times, I'll address it publicly. And one of those questions was, one involved AMS and one involved Steve the Dean Williams. So I'm going to address both. One guy asked me, he said, Alan, I like your videos, and I own 2 of your 4 audiobooks. So I know that you're, a rock solid dating coach. But that said, I notice you tend to mention your philosophical differences with alpha male strategies, and basically you don't feel like his advice is up to par. Then how do you explain in simple terms why he has more than 10 times as many Patreon subscribers as you do? Why does he have over 3,500 Patreon subscribers and you have less than 400? If you're such an outstanding dating coach, and again, I do believe you are an outstanding dating coach, but why, in simple terms, why do you think Alpha Male Strategies is so much more successful than you, at least on Patreon? Well, I think I've addressed this question before. And I'll tell you the real simple answer is, one of the things that helped catapult Alpha Male Strategies to popularity was he said everything that was pretty much the opposite of me. He said a lot of stuff that was pretty much the opposite of me. Whereas my Mode 1 approach is all about being upfront, specific, and straightforwardly honest with women, particularly if your interest is short-term, non-monogamous, casual sex. When Alpha Male Strategies first hit the scene, he was telling guys, basically, it's okay to lie to women. It's okay to be a liar. It's okay to be a blatant manipulator of women. It's okay to toy with women's emotions. As long as you get the pussy, I don't see the problem. And a lot of guys, and particularly young guys that are teenagers or in their 20s, they bought into that message. They bought into that message. And that's one of the first factors that catapulted his popularity, is because a lot of guys, he basically, in simple terms, he was saying what a lot of guys wanted to hear. He was saying what a lot of guys wanted to hear, which was that it's okay to be a blatant liar. It's okay to be a blatant manipulator. Now, as I pointed out in the last 2 or 3 months, if you notice, by virtue of his second book, he softened that stance. He softened that stance. He actually has a chapter in his new book, his second dating advice book, where he says, basically, you shouldn't lie to women. He basically argues that lying to women is only for insecure men. And he also similarly says you shouldn't really mislead and manipulate women and toy with their emotions. He basically said only low-value men should have to resort to that. So he's changed his stance. But the bottom line is, the main thing that first catapulted him to attract a lot of Patreon subscribers is because of his sleazeball gang message. That was his initial mantra. His initial mantra was the sleazeball gang mantra, which centered around, basically, he was telling guys, sending out the message to guys, that it's okay to be an unethical dick, basically. It's okay to be unethical. It's okay to lie to women and make them believe you want a long-term monogamous sexual relationship when you really want a short-term non-monogamous relationship. It's okay to do that. It's okay to make a woman feel like you've fallen in love with her, and then once you get the pussy, just dump her ass. The true definition of pump and dump. That's okay. And a lot of guys wanted to hear that. And the second thing, more generally, I would say, and I've said this a number of times too, and I talked about David X. David X when we were in London together in November 2010, me and David X, of course, had a lot of conversations because we were the two premier direct dating coaches in the manosphere. Yeah, I would say in the 2000s, nobody was considered more prominent as far as promoting direct verbal game than me and David X. Everybody else was pretty much, who was well known and influential in the manosphere, was promoting indirect verbal game. And David X, we were talking and he told me, he said, realistically, indirect PUAs and dating coaches are always going to be more popular, meaning they're going to have more subscribers, more followers, more financial supporters, more clients. Yeah, he said they're always going to be more popular and make more money than the average direct dating coach, for the simple fact that indirect game, it's not as egotistically risky as direct game is. And I've pointed that out a number of times on my videos. Indirect game, plain and simply, it's not as risky to your ego. There's less of a risk of your ego being bruised and your self-esteem being bruised when you go with the indirect approach. That's why a lot of guys favor indirect. Indirect doesn't guarantee that you won't be rejected by a woman. It doesn't guarantee that your number of rejections will diminish. But in most situations, it does suggest that you won't be rejected either as quickly and straightforwardly or as harshly as you would with a direct approach. And that's why a lot of guys favor indirect approach. So that would be my two reasons why I would say why Alpha Male Strategies has so many people, Patreon subscribers, say, compared to myself, is that I would say this. I would say, number one, I think a lot of young guys just simply love his personality. Nothing more, nothing less. A lot of young guys just simply love his personality. Number two, as I already mentioned, he gave a lot of advice that guys wanted to hear, which was, it's okay to lie to women. It's okay to be a manipulator, as long as you get the pussy. And number three, just generally indirect coaches, direct dating coaches, are always going to be more popular and attract more clients than the average direct approach dating coach. I mean, again, I have to point to his chapter 65 in his second book. It's entitled, Why I Am Against the Direct Approach. See, that chapter alone, it has a high potential to attract a lot of fans his way. It's just him making it known that he's against approaches like mine, the Mode 1 approach. But here's what I've always found interesting, and I point out hundreds of times, is on one end, Alpha Male Strategy says he's against direct verbal game and a direct approach, but at the same time, he repeats and regurgitates my knowledge, wisdom, and insight from my book, The Possibility of Sex, which centers around my philosophy of no free attention and severely limiting women's access to your non-sexual time, attention, and companionship if y'all ain't fucking. I'm not going to go into an in-depth explanation for the millionth time, but for my intelligent, objective-minded listeners and viewers, that's a blatant contradiction. And I don't understand how his followers don't see that. That's a blatant contradiction. It is a blatant contradiction on one end to say it's okay to go on as many as 3, 4, 5 dates with a woman, which is what he says in his books, that it's okay to go on 3, 4, 5 dates with a woman, but at the same time, tell those same men, yeah, you should limit women's access to your non-sexual time, attention, and companionship. How are you limiting women's access to your non-sexual time, attention, and companionship if you're willing to go on 2, 3, 4, 5 dates with them? Please explain that to me like I'm a third grader. I don't understand that. That's literally a blatant contradiction. Yeah, and like in his second book, he promotes what's known among conventional PUAs as the 3-date rule, which means you should be willing to go on as many as 3 dates, no less than 3 dates with a woman, even if you haven't fucked that woman yet. But at the same time, he be echoing my sentiments of no free attention. See, again, like me, I don't believe in going on I don't believe in going on even 1 date with a woman if your objective is casual sex. If your objective is casual sex, 1 or more episodes of short-term, non-monogamous casual sex, I don't believe in going out on even 1 date with a woman. And that's real talk. The only time I go on dates with women is if I look at a woman as a potential long-term girlfriend or a future wife. But if I know from the get-go that I look at a woman as just strictly fuck buddy material, I never ask women out on dates. I don't take them out on no lunch date, dinner date, movie date, concert date. I just get on the phone with them, have phone sex with them 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Then I set up so that we can hook up and fuck. Period. That's all I do with fuck buddies. That's real talk. That's all I do with fuck buddies. But, and I'll close on this final note in relation to this question. And I'll point this out once or twice before. Just because somebody has more YouTube subscribers than you and or more Patreon subscribers and supporters than you doesn't necessarily mean that they're better in their capacity than you are. And I've given a couple of analogies and examples of that. Like I did one with the Dallas Cowboys. Like, for example, the one I used the last time I brought this up was in the NFL, the Dallas Cowboys sell more merchandise than the New England Patriots organization does. But would anybody say that over the last 10 to 15 years that the Dallas Cowboys have had better teams than New England? Shit. Fuck no. It's just like an entertainment industry. There's a lot of movies that are of low average or less than average quality that will make hundreds of millions of dollars at the box office. Then you have movies that are high quality that all the critics say are a good movie. They'll get nominated for an Oscar and a Golden Globe. They may even win an Oscar or a Golden Globe, but they'll only make like an average to less than average amount of money at the box office. Like off the top of my head, I remember there was a movie came out called The Hurt Locker about people who work in the armed services who defuse bombs. And that movie won an Oscar for Best Picture, but yet at the box office it did horrible. On a TV level, I used to be a fan of this show called The Wire. That was the first show that gave Idris Elba a lot of fame and Michael B. Jordan a lot of fame and a lot of black male actors a lot of fame. What's the guy who played? God, his name is I'm forgetting it. With the scar on his face. With this guy, God, I'm forgetting his name. But yeah, The Wire. I remember the New York Times once wrote an article titled "The Best Show That No One Is Watching." The best show that no one is watching. And basically what the article went on to say was that The Wire, this person who wrote the article said he felt like The Wire was the best show on television, the best drama on television. But yet, its Nielsen ratings were very low. Its Nielsen ratings were very low, meaning it didn't have a lot of TV viewers. It wasn't a lot of people watching the show, even though it was a high quality show. So all that to say that I've heard people, usually young knuckleheads, try to say, well, you can tell that Alpha Male Strategies is a better dating coach than Alan Rogers Currie simply because of the fact he got way more Patreon subscribers. You can't use that as a metric. You can't use that as a metric. To me, I've said it again at least a handful of times before, that's an invalid metric. You can't evaluate the quality of his dating advice based on how many Patreon subscribers he has. Again, number one, his advice is totally different than mine. He primarily promotes indirect game. I promote direct game. There's always going to be a difference in terms of how many people follow each one. Again, man, anybody can do indirect game, man. I with all due respect to those who who are fans of Indirect Game, anybody could pull off Indirect Game, man. And to me, it doesn't take any balls or backbone to pull off Indirect Game. It really doesn't. It does not take any high degree of confidence or courage or balls and backbone to pull off Indirect Game. You can have an average to even less than average level of confidence and courage and still pull off Indirect Game. Whereas my approach, the Mode 1 approach, you got to have balls and backbone to pull off the Mode 1 approach. You don't have to have a lot of money. You don't have to be amazingly good looking. But if there's one character trait, behavioral trait you got to have to pull off the Mode 1 approach, is you got to have big ass balls and strong backbone. Facts. Next question I was asked. Somebody asked me, Alan, I see now that you're engaged to be married, and within the next few months you will be married. How can you assure your listeners, viewers, and supporters that your advice will still be relevant and applicable and beneficial to them, given the fact that you will no longer be single and, out in society basically womanizing? And then this person went on to say that, I feel like if a person starts off as a pickup artist or a dating coach being a single heterosexual man, and even more so a single heterosexual womanizer, then once they get into a serious relationship or once they get married, to me, their advice no longer is really relevant or valid because they're no longer out there still in the game. They're no longer out there still in the game. And somebody brought up Steve the Dean Williams. They said Steve the Dean Williams, I would put him in that category. Steve the Dean Williams has been married since 1999, and that's why he don't have that many followers and subscribers, because nobody cares about what Steve the Dean Williams has to say, because he's been married for like 20, 21 years. He's been out the game. Well, I'm actually partially defend Steve, even though I haven't spoken to him in months. I'm a partially defend him. See, here's the thing with advice. I would compare it to clothes. If anybody pays attention to clothing, they'll know there's generally two types of clothing, both men's clothing and women's clothing. There's what's known as Fad, F-A-D, Fad Clothing Styles. What that means is if you're wearing clothes that's considered fad or trendy, as another similar word, trendy clothing style, that means that style of clothing is only going to be popular for X number of years, and then it's going to fade out in popularity. I give an example. In the 1970s, one of the most popular pants for both men and women were pants known as bell bottoms. Bell bottoms. That was some of the most popular pants you could wear in the 1970s, was bell bottom pants. But starting with the early to mid 80s, really I would say technically the late 70s, I'd say starting with about 1978, 79, bell bottoms went out of style. Hardly anybody was wearing bell bottoms anymore. Guys were wearing more either just straight cut pants or pleated pants. Straight cut or pleated pants, pleated slacks. So, yeah, in clothing, a faddish clothing style or a trendy clothing style means it's going to be popular for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, maybe a little longer, but then it's going to fade out. Then there's other clothing styles that are considered timeless or classic, are the two words. Timeless clothing styles or classic. A good example of that would be most politicians and corporate businessmen. Most corporate businessmen are known for wearing charcoal gray suits. Charcoal gray, navy blue, or black. Those are probably the top 3 suits that are most popular among most corporate businessmen. Is charcoal gray, Glen plaid would be another one, navy blue or black. That's considered a timeless or classic style suit. It never goes out of style. Most presidents and politicians usually wear navy blue. with a red tie. Like, it's Donald Trump. A lot of his suits is navy blue, dark blue, or navy blue with a red tie. Barack Obama used to wear a lot of suits that were navy blue or dark blue. Excuse me, I got the burps. With a red tie. Those type of styles are considered timeless. They're considered timeless. That means they ain't gonna, that look is never going to go out of style. Particularly, again, if you're a corporate businessman or if you're a politician. That look is never, ever going to go out of style. Well, I would say the same thing to do with dating advice. Yeah, I would say the same thing to do with dating advice. There's some dating advice that I would categorize, using the analogy I just gave, as faddish dating advice. Like some advice I hear that PUAs give, that there's some advice that only applied to, say, the 1970s, or it only applied to the 1980s, or it only applied to the 1990s, or it only applied to the early 2000s, or it only applied to that period between, 2011 and 2019. So there's some variations of advice that only apply. And similarly, there's some advice that only applies to guys who are in pursuit of casual sex. There's some advice that only applies to guys who are in pursuit of casual sex. And I pointed this out on another video I did within the last month or so. I was saying that very little of my advice solely and specifically centers on the pursuit of short-term non-monogamous casual sex. So therefore, me getting married has nothing to do with my advice becoming invalid or irrelevant or not applicable. Because the vast majority of my advice applies to both people who are in serious relationships and people who are just out here casually fucking. Most of my advice centers around primarily 2 to 3 things. Number one thing my advice centers around is improving your verbal communication skills to a point where your verbal communication skills and conversation skills are more confident, more courageous, more sexually provocative, and more upfront, specific, and straightforwardly honest. That can apply to guys who are in pursuit of long-term monogamous sex, long-term non-monogamous sex, short-term monogamous sex, or short-term non-monogamous sex. Second thing my advice centers around is helping men quickly identify women who are trying to engage them in manipulative head games. And again, that doesn't just apply to men who are out here casually fucking. That applies to men who are in pursuit of long-term monogamous relationships with women, long-term non-monogamous relationship with women, otherwise known as polyamory or open relationships, short-term monogamous, i.e. serial monogamy, or short-term non-monogamous sex, i.e. casual sex. It applies to all 4. And then the third main thing I emphasize is just generally helping men overcome their fear of rejection and their fear of subjective criticisms, personal insults, and negative reactions in general. And again, that can apply to all types of men, regardless of what their relationship objective is. So, all that to say, now, since this person brought up Stevie D. Williams, Stevie D. Williams is not really a dating coach. I know a lot of people refer to him as a dating coach. I think even sometimes he refers to himself as a dating, but he's not really a dating coach. At least he wasn't when I first met him. When I first met Stevie Williams, which was in fall of 2006, when I very first crossed paths with Stevie D. Williams, he didn't even refer to himself as a dating coach. He really didn't. He didn't refer to himself as a dating coach. He was just a guy who, number one, would offer a lot of strong opinions on the subject of dating and relationships. he would express a lot of strong opinions on the subject of dating and relationships. It's just like if you got a talk radio host, I give you an example. A good example would be like Tom Leykis. Tom Leykis would be a good example. Tom Leykis was a guy, he never marketed himself as a dating coach, even though some people have given him that title, but he never marketed himself as a dating coach. He was just a man who had been married 2 or 3 times, got divorced, and he had developed a lot of strong opinions on the subject of dating and relationships, and he would express those strong opinions on his talk radio show. That's basically how Stephen Dean Williams was. When I first met him, he did not market himself as a dating coach. He was just a guy who had a lot of strong opinions about the subject of dating and relationships. Number 2, his specific emphasis was not so much on attraction and seduction as much as it was on just being a masculine man. You could almost say he was more of a masculinity coach when I first met him in 2006. He was all about telling men to basically always exhibit behavior that's real masculine towards women, to never take no bullshit from women or no disrespect from women, always be the king of your castle, be a manly man, make manly decisions. So if anything, he was a masculine coach. And the third and final thing, he was a sex coach. He used to have these videos teaching guys how to like lick pussy, how to lick booty, how to fuck women in different positions. So those are the 3 things that Steve was about when I first crossed paths with him in 2006. He never called himself a dating coach like me. He never called himself. He didn't start doing that until later. He never called himself a dating. He was just, number 1, a guy with very strong opinions on the subject of dating and relationships, and he would express those strong opinions. Number 2, he was always giving guys advice on just being masculine, being a masculine man. And then number 3, he had these videos, sex 101 videos that he used to sell to different males who wanted to learn how to perform oral sex better. If you into licking booty, as he called it, eating booty. He had an eating booty video, and he had videos about how to tongue kiss, how to fuck in certain positions. So you could say he was a sex coach, but he was an overall dating coach. So all that to say that, given the 3 things that he was about, I don't think the fact that he's married diminishes the validity of his advice. You can be married and have strong opinions on the subject of dating and relationships. You can be single or be married and have simply strong opinions on dating and relationships. Number 2, you could be married or single and encourage men to be very masculine in their behavior and their decision making. And third, when it comes to teaching sex skills, you can be married or be single and make sex 101 videos. See, the only time I think you lose credibility once you get into a relationship or once you get married, and I already did a video about this, is when you started off being, like, say, a conventional PUA who was all about going to nightclubs and bars and restaurants and picking women up and fucking them and having like a one-night stand, weekend fling or something with them. But then once you get into a serious relationship or you get engaged or you get married, all of a sudden you go do a 180 and you're telling guys, no, don't pick up women and don't try to seduce women for a one-night stand or weekend fling. See, that's when you're going to lose credibility. I haven't done a flip-flop like that with any of my advice. I haven't done any type of flip-flop like that with any of my advice. So anyway, that's my thoughts. Now, moving to the main thing I wanted to talk about. Again, I had about 3 or 4 guys that wanted to get more clarification on the concept of plausible deniability. They weren't totally ignorant or unfamiliar with the term, but they felt like they've gotten different descriptions and definitions of what that means. So I'm going to spell out, at least from the mind of Alan Roger Currie, what it means, because in my very last video, I talked about when you exhibit a lot of variations of indirect verbal game with women, you open the door for plausible deniability, which can be a bad thing. So I'm going to just briefly examine it, and then I'm going to wrap up the video. What exactly does it mean for a woman to express plausible deniability? Plausible deniability. Well, when a woman engages in sexual relations with a man, and then later, hours later, days later, weeks later, months later, years later, tends to express some degree of plausible deniability, this means that a woman finds herself in one of three situations. This means a woman finds herself in one of three situations. Situation number one, the woman is expressing that she engaged in sexual relations with a man because she was coerced, forced, or pressured into having sex with that man. In other words, she didn't really have a true, genuine, natural desire to have sex with that man, but she was in a situation where a man coerced her, forced her, or pressured her into having sex. And she felt like if she was to decline that man's sexual advances, she would at maximum risk being physically harmed, assaulted, or even murdered. Or at minimum, she felt like she would risk losing out on a career opportunity or a career promotion or some type of financial gain. So that first situation, as most men should realize, that's the basis for probably, roughly 2/3 of the Me Too movement era allegations and accusations are related to factor number one, which is women who had sex with guys, not because they genuinely wanted to have sex with those guys, but because they were either raped by men, date raped by men, groped by men without their consent, had a man expose his genitals to them when they didn't ask that man to. They had men tell them, if you don't give me some pussy, I'll deny you a career opportunity or I'll deny you a job promotion, etc. So that's the biggest area of plausible deniability. That is when a woman can say, I didn't have sex with this man because I really wanted to. In a nutshell, that's what plausible deniability is when you put a woman in a position where she could say later, I didn't have sex with that guy because I really wanted to and because I was really attracted to him and I gave him my full verbal consent to engage in sex with him. There was some other reason why I ended up having sex with him. And again, factor number one is a woman who feels like she was coerced to, physically forced to, or pressured to, like by a boss. Like, if I had to name a few names who fell into that category, it would be guys like Tavis Smiley. Tavis Smiley's situation falls into this category. Harvey Weinstein's situation falls into this category. Charlie Rose, his situation falls into this category. Leslie Moonves, his situation falls into this category. So that would be at least 4 examples of guys whose Me Too situation falls into category number 1. Now, moving on to category number 2 of a plausible deniability situation. Somewhat similar to factor number 1, the woman is expressing that she never knowingly or voluntarily offered the man who she had sex with her full verbal consent prior to the sexual activities taking place, primarily because she had consumed some degree of alcohol and hard liquor, and or she had absorbed drugs in her system such as marijuana, cocaine, heroin, etc. And if you remember, I did a video about this when I was talking about the increase of date rape allegations and accusations on college campuses. And one of the things I talked about is that, see, here's what you got to understand. There's a lot of situations to do with having sex with women that now are considered illegal or at minimum very unethical. If not illegal, very unethical, that at one point in time used to be legal. I'll tell you one right off the bat. I've said this before. Rape itself, just general rape. Do you know there was a point in human history where rape was not illegal? Yeah, there was a point centuries ago where rape was actually not illegal. It was considered unethical, but it wasn't actually illegal. Yeah, it was not. In many cultures and countries, it was not considered illegal. And that's why women would always try to hook up, find them a strong, could whoop ass type boyfriend or husband so he could prevent them from being raped. But yeah, there was a point in our human history where rape was not illegal. It was generally considered unethical. Like, I give one version of rape, marital rape. There was a time just in the latter part of the 19th century, early part of the 20th century, where there was no such thing as marital rape. There was no such thing as a husband raping his wife. Whereas nowadays, you can't rape your wife. You can go to prison if you rape your wife. A lot of guys may not realize that, yeah. If your own wife was to accuse you of raping her, you can actually go to jail or go to prison. Date rape. And this is what I talked about in that previous video. When I was coming up, man, there was no such thing as date rape. Like in the 1970s, and for at least 2/3 or 3/4 of the 1980s, there was no such thing as date rape. Like, you could, when I was in college at Indiana University in the early to mid 80s, you could get a woman sloppy drunk and then take off her clothes and have sex with her, and you weren't going to go to prison for date rape because there was technically no such thing as date rape. Or you could get a woman high. You could have her smoking weed or have her snorting cocaine or something, and then once she's high, you could take advantage of her, take her clothes off and fuck her. And that woman couldn't charge you with date rape because there was no such thing as date rape. Date rape didn't come into play until somewhere between 1988 and 1990. That's when you first start hearing about date rape. Was around somewhere between 1988 and 1990. But before that, man, there wasn't no such thing as date rape. Particularly as it relates to like drinking alcohol or using drugs, there was no such thing as date rape. Whereas nowadays, in today's society, if you were to meet a woman and say you got her sloppy drunk and then you fucked her, she could very, very much later on tell the police that you date raped her, and there's a greater than 50% chance you're going to be convicted. Yeah, if she can prove that she was so sloppy drunk that she was not able with a sober mind to give you verbal consent, more than likely you're going to be charged with and convicted of date rape. Whereas again, that wasn't the case in like the 1970s and the first 2/3 of the 1980s. That wasn't the case. But yeah, so that would be situation number 2 that deals with plausible deniability. That's why I always tell guys, man, you should never try to get a woman drunk or get a woman high before you have sex with her the very first time. I don't believe in that. Really, I don't believe in that in general, but at minimum, definitely the very first time. If it's maybe your 5th time fucking a woman, your 10th time fucking a woman, then that's when I probably say go ahead and let her drink alcohol before you fuck her or let her smoke a joint. But if you haven't fucked a woman yet and it's going to be your very first time, I never fuck women for the first time with alcohol or drugs in their system. Never, ever. And that's real talk. I never fuck women for the first time if they have alcohol in their system or drugs such as cocaine or marijuana in their system. I don't do that, man. That's too risky, man. That's too risky. You'll find yourself in a prison cell doing that shit. And the third and final, and this is probably the most controversial of the three, particularly among men, this is the most controversial of the three among men, is the woman is expressing that she did indeed voluntarily offer her verbal consent to a man to engage in sexual relations, but she only offered her verbal consent because she thought the man wanted to engage in a long-term, emotionally profound, exclusively committed romantic relationship that had a high possibility of leading to marriage and or pregnancy at some point in the future. And see, it's the third category that I was alluding to in my very last video when I was talking about how lying to women and misleading and manipulating women and using different variations of indirect game, you're opening the door for plausible deniability. Because if you remember when I did that video where I talked about how Rollo Tomasi, author of The Rational Male, he was doing a podcast and he said that I think because of the Me Too movement and other similar movements, that over the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years, he basically said, I think Alan Roger Currie's Mode 1 approach is going to be the default approach in the future. And one of the reasons he said that is because there's a group of feminists. There are a group of feminists, according to Rollo, that he talked about in his podcast, in Australia, that category number 3, now that's already considered unethical. Unethical. By most women's standards, that type of behavior is already considered unethical, but it's not considered illegal. Well, guess what? There's a group of feminists in a few places, most notably Australia, they want that to be considered illegal. No, I'm not joking. I know you're like, get out of here, you joking. No, I'm serious. There are a group of feminists, they want being lied to and misled and manipulated by men to be synonymous with date rape. Yes, there are women in society who want that to be considered a form of date rape. So like if you were to meet a woman named Amber and you either told Amber that you wanted a long-term romantic relationship with her, or at minimum you were kind of vague and ambiguous and you gave her the subtle impression that you were open to a long-term, emotionally profound, romantic type relationship, but then say you fucked Amber like 5 times and then you just didn't call her no more, you didn't contact her, you went ghost on her, you basically pumped and dumped her. There are women who want pump and dump illegal. Yes, I'm not joking. There are women who want pump and dump to be illegal. They want you to be in a jail cell or a prison cell because of pumping and dumping. I mean, there's already been consequences. I did a video where I already talked about there's already consequences to pumping and dumping women. There might not be legal consequences and repercussions, but there's definitely career-related consequences and repercussions. Me Too movement, anyone? There are guys, again, Tabitha Smiley, my old fraternity brother, man. Come on, man. Aziz Ansari, once again, I'll bring up his name. That's why that woman trashed him in that letter she wrote to that site called babe.net. She trashed his whole reputation because he basically pumped and dumped her. So you might not have guys going to jail or going to prison because of pump and dump, but you're having guys losing jobs because of pumping and dumping women. You're having guys suffering major tarnishments, a tainted public image and social reputation. You're having guys losing money because of pumping and dumping. So the repercussions already exist. They may not exist on a legal level, but just on a career and financial level, there's already consequences and repercussions to the idea of lying to women, misleading and manipulating them, and generally pumping and dumping them. So anyway, all that to say, that's what pump and dump is. I mean, that's what plausible deniability is about. In real extra simple terms, when you give a woman plausible deniability, you give a woman the opportunity to say, I really did not want to have sex with this guy. I really did not genuinely, enthusiastically, and voluntarily want to engage in sex with this guy. Again, the three forms of plausible deniability would be, well, I had sex with Joe Johnson, but the only reason I had sex with him was because he raped me, or because he date raped me, or he physically forced me to have sex with him, or he told me I wouldn't be able to get this job if I didn't have sex with him, or I wouldn't be able to keep my job if I didn't have sex with him, or I would be fired if I didn't have sex with him, or I wouldn't get a certain promotion if I didn't have sex with him. That's the only reason I had sex with Joe Johnson, is because I was coerced to, forced to, and pressured to. That's category number one of plausible deniability. Category number two is I wouldn't have had sex with Brian Williams if I would have been sober. If I would have been completely sober, I wouldn't have made the decision to have sex with Brian Williams. The only reason I had sex with Brian Williams was because I was sloppy drunk, or he had so much marijuana and cocaine in my system that I couldn't, with my intellectual faculties working at a proper level, I couldn't make a proper decision. I was prevented from giving my full verbal consent because I had alcohol and or drugs in my system. That's category number two of plausible deniability. Category number three, which again is probably the most controversial among men in today's society, is a woman saying, well, the only reason I had sex with Tyrone Jackson was because he made me feel like he was in love with me. He made me feel like I was going to be his future long-term girlfriend, his future fiance, his future wife. If I would have known up front that all we were going to do is engage in 5 to 10 episodes of casual sex, I would have never had sex with Tyrone Jackson. But he lied to me. He told me how much he cared for me. He spent a lot of time with me non-sexually. He made me feel like he was really emotionally attached to me. But I see now he was just a liar and a manipulator. And I want his ass locked up. I want Tyrone Jackson locked up. That's what you're dealing with today, fellas. Are you ready for the challenge? Are you ready for the challenge? If you're ready to apply my knowledge, my wisdom, my insight, my Mode 1 brand of dating advice to the remainder of the 21st century, then I would say you're ready for the challenge. But if you hell bent on exhibiting different variations of unethical indirect game, such as lying to women, misleading and manipulating women, toying with their emotions, and pumping and dumping, all I can say is, may God be with you. Good luck.
Yes, sir.
Say it again.
Yes, sir.
Who's the king?
Alan, you're the king.
Say it again.
Alan, you're the king. You're dominating me.
Say it again.
Alan, you're dominating me right now. Mode 1.
Mode 1.
Daddy, can I go, please? You're the king.
Say it again.
Oh, you're the fucking king. Yes. Yes. Yes.
You're the king, Alan.
AKA the king of verbal seduction. You know, it's the tone of your voice, how seductive your intonations are, the vibrations that you could just reach out over the phone lines and stroke a woman's breast just by the sound of your voice, how you could make her pussy so wet just by the sound of your voice. That's actually very hot.
So you said my show was what?
I said your show is powerful.
Oh, say it again.
Your show is powerful.
I bet the king would fuck me really good.
Oh, yeah. Who's the king?
Alan Roger Currie.
The king.
The king.
I have to agree with you on the communication piece because I actually did take a session with Alan Roger Currie, and he gave me a line that I did not think was going to work, and it worked. And I was like, what the fuck?
Oh my God!
Man, he's the master. He's the master of the verbal seduction. He got that communication piece down pat.
It really worked. It just simply worked, and I just didn't think it was going to work at all.
Verbal seduction, man. I'm like, clearly, this guy's the Michael Jordan of seduction. Like, come on now.